Welcome, everyone. You're watching In the Crosshairs with Raquel, Okyay, and I'm your host. And my special guest today is Erik Royce. Erik Royce is the founder of Truckers for Guns, and he's also actually a good friend of mine. So this is going to be a really good show. Erik and I have been friends. We met at the Gun Rights Policy Conference in Tampa a few years ago, and we had so many similar interests. And the other thing that connects us is that we're just about the same age. So I think I'm about 2 weeks older than you. So we have that commonality together. So we're like
my sister from another mister.
Yes. Awesome. So I'm so excited to have you on the show. That's number one. And of course, you're a reoccurring guest on my blog talk radio show on Friday nights, and I really appreciate you coming on and participating in our discussions, which include a lot of different things. But today we're going to be talking about our favorite topic, gun rights. And that's what I've been doing here on In the Crosshairs, been kind of putting together a niche following. And it ends up that a lot of the guests that I bring on, you all end up being friends. We all end up being in the same community.
Right.
So it's interesting to get our perspectives, and we get it out there, and we let the public know that we are the NRA. We are the gun owners. We're not out there. We're not the boogeyman. We're not the bad guys. Our firearms haven't done anything. We're very responsible adults, particularly with our firearms. And we want the public to know that that negative connotation that the public might get from the media is just simply lopsided. So I'm bringing on the gun people, and you can decide for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And the media's issue really is that they're just so full of bias, and they'll take any opportunity that they could to spin the facts around to fit their own convenient political agendas, and which is one of the reasons why they don't report on positive gun stories, like if a person uses their CCW rights, if they were a concealed carry holder and they were carrying their concealed firearm that day legally, there's countless incidences where people have used their firearms in self-defense or to protect somebody or to prevent some mass shooting. And the media
it acts as a deterrent, because if you're in a crowded place and there might be some suspicious looking people, and they understand that you're carrying, they understand that you're armed. And those incidences do not get told. Nobody knows this happens, and it prevents tons of crime. So it's very easy for the media to spin everything in a different direction. I think at this point, it's not just two-way. They spin just about everything to fit a political agenda, like you said.
Right. Yeah, they spin everything, and they do everything they could to prevent any of those good stories. There's only one, network out there. I hate to, sit here and plug, a particular network, but the only network really is Fox News, and even they hardly report on those things. But once in a while, if there is a big story, they'll go ahead and report on it, and just for fun.
Yeah, they do some good stories on Donald Trump.
Yeah, yeah, and just for fun. Whenever something like that happens, I'll go ahead and run over to Google, and I'll check, I'll do a search of that particular incident. And it's usually only the local hard news outlets, like KTVU up in Oakland, California, or the networks here in Arizona. And then Fox News might do a quick story on it and say, see, this is what happens when the law-abiding carries guns in states where you're allowed to carry firearms for self-protection. So yeah, the news media is supposed to be a neutral reporting type of, press. That's the reason for the press clause, is so that the news media can come out and report on these things to the public and be like that arm between the public and the person sitting in their living room watching television or listening to the radio. But instead, they've become a political arm, and it's been that political arm in favor of trying to disarm the people. And even if it were a political arm in favor of arming the people and preventing government from disarming the people, then the other side would be complaining that, oh, well, the news media is nothing but a political arm, and which is probably why some people consider Fox News to be a, quote, state-run news agency. They were doing that. They were saying that a lot during the Bush administration. So when it comes down to constitutional rights,
some kind of balance. And the reality is, the newspapers are generally used to be the case where the first few pages of the newspaper is your news, is your basic reporting.
And that be your hard news.
That shouldn't, ought not to have a political angle. Once you get into the opinion pages or the editorials, now we have a different story. So the editors and the writers, for the publication, I mean, certainly if they have an opinion, they're entitled to share it. I don't have a problem with their opinion. But what I started noticing from the New York Times, for example, back when Bush was president, was that their first few pages, which I'm just really looking for the news, reading the newspaper for the daily news. And now I'm hearing a Bush bash in between every single article. So even in the art and wine section, I'm getting a Bush bash. And this is not news reporting. So while they have the opportunity to go ahead and put your opinion, because as a reader, you read it, okay, opinion, editorial. Okay, I get it. Now I'm going to take it with a grain of salt because, I understand that's your opinion, but try to putting your opinion inside the news reporting portion. And that's where we've lost ground. We've absolutely lost ground in the simple reporting. And it's not necessarily the reporters. So, it's the bigger journalist companies, publishing companies that are in control. So they can prevent what news they want covered. They can dictate the agenda. Obviously a lot of it is scripted. Everything in Hollywood is scripted. Everything in Hollywood is scripted. We're not scripted.
No, we're not scripted.
No
we're not controlled. We're not controlled, nor are we scripted, just like our president. and I think that's why so many people like President Trump. It's because he's not controlled and he's not scripted. He usually doesn't read from a teleprompter. But the one thing
I really like what he does. It's really impressive. He calls the mainstream and like CNN and stuff fake news.
Fake news. Yeah. Well, I was laughing hysterically one day when he was giving an interview. I think he was doing a press conference. I think that he had just won, and he was addressing CNN, and CNN started complaining that, well, Mr. President, why you keep calling us fake news? We're not fake news. And then he said, well, from this day forward, we will no longer be calling CNN fake news. We will be calling CNN very fake news. And I just started laughing hysterically. I still laugh to this day at that one.
Like that's just, it's beautiful, for conservatives, who've been complaining about a lopsided media for a long time. So, this isn't something new.
Yeah.
But
it's been going on forever.
Directly, he calls it like it is. He calls it like it is. I really like Trump. Yeah. Could you give me because I've been hearing like conflicting reports from some of my friends on Facebook, who some of them dislike Trump, some of them don't. Some of them like him very much. What is your opinion with respect to 2A in general? Do we have a president who do you think at the end of the day will be supportive of gun control, of reducing, maybe decriminalizing some of the gun control laws? Or do you think he might be in favor of producing more laws on a federal level, which is the only thing he really has power to do? He can sign things into law that Congress passes, and the other thing he can do is be a bully pulpit. So in terms of 2A, where do you think the president stands? Is he going to be helpful, or is he not going to be helpful to our cause?
I personally believe that he has been helpful, but I don't think that he's been helpful enough, and I've been critical of the president with regard to the when it comes to one particular narrow issue, that being the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act of 2017, in which Congressman Richard Hudson authored that bill. I forget the bill number, but it's HR 38. And I think that that's the best one that's in Congress right now. It's actually, it started circulating its way through the Senate, and then it got stalled right after the tragic shooting in Florida, where 17 people got shot. And the president was talking in that roundtable discussion with a bunch of senators, with Dianne Feinstein sitting next to him, and they started talking about, they were talking more about depriving persons between 18 and 21 years old from being able to purchase firearms. And the subject of concealed carry reciprocity came up very briefly, and he said, and I think if I'm not mistaken, and I should be corrected if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he said that's not going to happen anytime soon. And it made me incredibly critical because number one, he was given the endorsement by the NRA. And that's extremely important. That is extremely important to get an endorsement from the NRA. That's so important. And number two, he made a lot of promises. He promised that he would save the Second Amendment, that the Second Amendment would be in good hands during his presidency. And so far, we don't have a Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. Raquel, I was just in New York. I was just in New York City for some swing jazz. And I was on Times Square, and there were literally thousands upon thousands of people there. And among those thousands of people, and it was beautiful, I loved it. But among those thousands of people, there were a few police officers. There were some carrying AR-15 type platform rifles with riot gear on. And I don't know why they were carrying riot gear, but I felt
the major terminals like Penn Station, Port Authority. Yeah. If you were at Times Square, that's another major train hub. Sure. So you will see those officers in that way, and it really is, they really surround the transportation hubs, the major ones. There's a lot. Yeah,
it made me a little bit uneasy. Walking past them.
I kind of get into it, but yeah.
But on the other hand, I did stop and I addressed them, and I said, hey, those AR-15s are very lovely, beautiful AR-15s. God bless the United States of America. Why don't you believe that, why are American citizens like me prohibited from carrying those kinds of weapons? They of course, didn't have an answer. They can't give an opinion. Yeah, they can't. They're not going to give an opinion. And at one point, I said, "Do you think that American citizens who are law-abiding and have never been in trouble with the law should be able to carry, own, and possess such weapons in the home?" And of course, this is all I got. They just gave, "This is all I got." Well, here in Arizona, you're allowed to own and possess semi-automatic rifles. Be it on a AK or AR-15 platform, AK-47 SKS, but in California you can't. But getting back to the issue concerning concealed carry reciprocity, it's a measure that's been long overdue. The president needs to get on board. I've written to him a number of times. I've written to congressmen. I've emailed and faxed and contacted by telephone just about every single congressman and senator who has not signed on to this measure yet, and they still don't sign on to it. And it's important that people who are gun owners and people who are concerned about their right to keep and bear arms, it's extremely important for them to go out in November and vote for the one candidate who can best address their right to keep and bear arms under the law, under the Constitution.
You can, Erik. What I want you to do is, because reciprocity, has been around a while. Some people don't support it. I think a majority of us do support it, and there's a lot of good reasons for it. And particularly from your perspective as your former career as a trucker, you would be traveling from state to state in your rig. Is that something that you're used to? Something I know you're prohibited from doing that, but we're going to get into that in a second.
Yeah.
But I want you to let the listeners know, what exactly does the reciprocity bill mean? And before you do that, I do want to make a comment about Trump.
Mm-hmm.
He makes statements, off the cuff statements without really thinking about it. But I don't know whether reciprocity, getting it passed in Congress, right? I think it should get passed right away. That is absolutely my idea. It should move right now. But because of midterm elections, it just might be, we really don't have enough. We really might not be able to get it passed. And he may have been referencing that. It's not going to happen because we don't have enough votes. However, I do think that Trump comes back to some issues, like, for instance, the cannabis legalization. He promised a lot of the voters that he's not going to touch that. He's not going to prosecute cannabis users. And then, boom, his attorney general came out and said, I'm going after cannabis users, right? And everybody was in an uproar, and I don't blame us. I was too. But he's come around on that now. And I think sometimes with Trump, it's sometimes just a little bit of good people surrounding him, giving him good information, and that it's the right time to go ahead and push it forward. So I wouldn't lose hope with him, particularly when it comes to the reciprocity bill, which I want to explain, and why it's so important for us as Americans, the freedom to travel, to be able to be armed in these instances, traveling between states.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I too believe that Trump will soon come around. I'm hopeful that he will. But when it comes to truckers and traveling, particularly long haul truckers, I might pick up a shipment in Southern California where one cannot, is generally prohibited from carrying a concealed handgun openly or concealed outside the home, unless if you have a carry license, a CCW in California, and it has to be issued by the California sheriff upon good cause, upon approval of that good cause. But a person from Nevada who might live in Nevada, who drives a truck for a living and is sent out to California, if that person has a Nevada CCW, well, guess what? He has to pack up his gun. He has to put it in a hard-sided case or a case of some kind, perhaps lock it, and he can't have access to it if he's going into California. The laws, I have to kind of refresh myself on that particular part of the law. But before I go on with that, I just want to mention really quick for the record that there is no particular federal law that prohibits truck drivers from carrying a firearm in their truck. That's a myth. It's a myth that's been going around for a very long time, and I think that it was started in one of those trucking industry carrier hiring orientation meetings where the HR representative came out to address the new drivers, and then started going over the do's and don'ts, and then began with weapons and said, you can't carry weapons, you can't carry knives larger than so large, such a size of blade, and oh, by the way, you can't carry a handgun or any kind of firearm And then I think that she threw in a fake caveat there that said, and besides that, there's a federal law that says thou shalt not own or possess a firearm in the truck. Well, there is no such federal law. It's BS. It's a bunch of BS.
I mean, they're just making up administrative laws. So if you want to work for our company, you can't carry a firearm in your truck. But it's not a federal law. Absolutely not.
Right. Now they can have their company policy. Company policy can trump federal law, the Constitution. The Constitution only binds government actions. It doesn't bind private enterprise. United States versus Cruikshank. It's, you know, the 14th Amendment, it's a beautiful provision of our Constitution, but it only protects us from government. It only binds government state actions. And the Fifth Amendment's due process clause only binds federal government actions. But if I was working for, say, J.B. Hunt, which is a very large national trucking industry carrier, I'm 99.9% certain that they have a provision in their policy book that says no drivers are allowed to have firearms while on duty driving our truck and our equipment. And, you know, the trucking industry carriers and the drivers, even if we were to pass national concealed carry reciprocity and make it a broad law that says that gives drivers almost carte blanche authority to carry firearms from state to state, they would still be stuck with company policy. And the reason, in part, why companies have to have these policies is because of shippers and receivers that have policies that say no drivers or no one is allowed to bring a gun into our facility, our shipping or our dock facility with a firearm. So those companies need to adjust to any new law as well. Trucking, I'm afraid the trucking industry carriers would still be inclined to keep such policies. There's few companies out there that do allow their drivers to carry firearms.
That's
but
good.
If you're going into a post office facility, for example,
you might have to go through some kind of procedure, like putting the firearm away, locking it away in your truck. You have to be really specific. But I think this is sort of the problem with traveling between state and state, because the way I've seen the law said is that, number one, it's really about reciprocity of other states' laws. So each state has gun laws. And the idea is that as long as you have your permit, your concealed carry permit, like on a federal level, then you're following the, whatever guidelines Congress determines is fair. You're just simply following one set of guidelines, because what we have right now is that whether you were a trucker or just a traveler, if you wanted to go state to state with your firearm, you'd have to do about 3 hours worth of reading. You'd have to figure out which laws, which states have passed which laws. How do you have to carry your gun? You have to put it in the trunk. You have to close it up. You have to going through New Jersey. And the other problem is that I know at least of one specific case that I wrote an article for Human Events, and it was a woman who had a concealed carry permit from Pennsylvania, and she was just came in and out of New Jersey. The states are right next to each other. She literally came in and out of New Jersey but she was there for about 4 minutes. She got pulled over, and she notified the police officer that pulled her over that she was a concealed carry holder from Pennsylvania, and that her firearm was in her glove compartment. Well, the state of New Jersey arrested her.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things that, I think the reciprocity bill can correct. So firearm owners who want to travel between states, as long as we're following the same guideline, it's whatever that guideline is. But certainly not, it's not like a free-for-all. So it's not like it would be legal I don't think there's anything wrong with it anyway, but how the laws are, it's not like it's a free-for-all, so you can just do whatever you want. Okay, that's not what reciprocity means.
Right.
So it deserves support because it eliminates the time spent with false, for arresting people who aren't criminals, arresting people because they're driving in between states with their firearms, what they should be able to do. According to the Second Amendment, they really should be able to do that. And just putting on whatever restrictions we want to agree on a national level, and let's do it. I think we have the support. Maybe not this year, but I think on next session, after the midterm.
I think that it's pretty much over for this year, and next session we're going to have to wait till next session. November's coming up. One thing that I like about what President Trump is doing is he's going from state to state and holding rallies and reminding people that, look, let's not let our guards down. Let's get out the vote. And if you really want to secure your freedoms, then you've got to vote for the GOP guy. That's just how it is. Because the Democrats are all about.
You don't find a lot of Democrats who are going to stand tall for the Second Amendment. You do find them in certain states. California, New York, New Jersey.
No, absolutely
Illinois.
not. Yeah.
DC.
The hell would freeze over. It would snow in hell before any Democrat in California, New York, even DC, New Jersey were to support the Second Amendment. And
there's a saying, Eric, and it's a Republican is always better than a Democrat.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I always agree. I hate voting.
But Republicans say that.
I always hate voting along party lines, but and I have voted for the Democrat before because I thought that he was going to actually be in support, more in support of the GOP guy who turned out to be a rhino and was more of a liberal Democrat than a Republican, and was just calling himself a Republican so as to get support from the Republicans. And that was Dan Lundgren in California was a prime example of that. And he lost his seat at one point along the way because he was a flaming liberal who called himself a Republican. And he was
do that, and it ends up coming back to them because I think that their constituents, if you're going to be a liberal, at least be out there with it. Put your platform on the table. The supporters that agree with you, but otherwise, don't try to hoodwink conservatives into believing that you have a conservative philosophy. And I would add to what you said about getting out the vote in November for Republicans. I would add to get involved with your local campaigns, and also to confront or maybe put out a phone call to the campaign office and ask them specifically their opinion on Second Amendment. So just because they have the GOP moniker does not necessarily mean that they're pro-Second Amendment.
Right.
So it's good to get, it's good to find out, and you can find out yourself, especially when they're running for office and they're just a candidate so far. They want to learn what your questions are. They are very helpful. They want to answer you. It's easier to talk to a candidate than it is to talk to a politician.
Right. I agree. And I've talked to candidates before in the past before they've won their election. I talked to one in particular who was running on the Democratic platform. He was the vice mayor of Fremont, California at the time. This was back in early 2000s, in late, I think in 2008, I should say, or 2009. And just after I became involved in gun rights, and I called this guy's campaign. His name was Wykowski, I think. And I said, what do you think about the Second Amendment? How do you feel about the Second Amendment? And he said it right off the bat, right up front, just as blunt as can all be. He said, I'm not a fan of the Second Amendment. And that was his response. And I said, well, at least you're honest about it. and you don't, beat around the bush.
Right.
And I called several other people who were outraged. I said, yeah, this guy said he's not a fan of the Second Amendment. They expressed absolute outrage. And I said, okay, that's fine. But even if he were, were not a fan of the Second Amendment, at least he was telling the truth. At least he was being honest. He didn't come out and say, I respect the Second Amendment, but we need more common sense, blah, blah, blah. He didn't say that. He just said, I'm not a fan of the Second Amendment. So I would rather have a guy come out and tell the truth about how they feel about something rather than to sugarcoat something. The truth hurts, but I would rather hear the truth. Then that way he could get it out to as many people as possible and say, hey, this guy's not a fan of the Second Amendment. He proclaims that he's not a fan of the Second Amendment. So therefore, we shouldn't vote for him, as opposed to the guy who says, I respect the Second Amendment, but we need more common sense gun reform laws. Well, people might not be inclined to go out and vote against that guy as much as they would be if they went out and voted against the guy who said, I'm not a fan of the Second Amendment. That might piss off more people, and that's what we need. Politicians don't tell the truth. You and I know that.
Okay, I want to shift gears here on a different topic. We touched on it last night on my Blog Talk radio show, Rocky and the Gons. And that's this problem with veterans who, and not just veterans, it really is the entire population. But we see an uptick of veterans suffering from things like PTSD. Suffering from mental health conditions, as a result of being in the service. So they come back from serving the country. They're now veterans, and they're experiencing some problems. They want to go talk to somebody. Now, if they go talk to somebody, and that somebody who could just be any healthcare professional, and that somebody decides, I'm not comfortable with what they're talking about, and if they have firearms, I think that, maybe we should go call the sheriff's office and have them take it away. And this is real. This is already happening. So I know about different stories. Can the law do that in every state? No, they don't do that in every state. But there are states where the laws are set up where any healthcare professional can determine that your firearms are a risk, and they're right on the phone calling the police, and you're getting your firearms returned, taken away from you, confiscated, and now you have to go hire a lawyer. You have to go fight for your rights back. In other words, they confiscate, and then they ask questions later. There's no due process. Your civil rights are absolutely being violated, and the idea is that sometimes these veterans who want to get help might refrain from getting the help they need because they don't want their firearms taken away.
Right.
I mean, these are guys who trained with firearms. If they want to have they're out there protecting, our country abroad. Of course, they want to protect their own family and their homes. And, they have all these restrictions put on us just like all other citizens. But I can imagine if I was a veteran and trained a shooter carrying all kinds of firearms abroad, that I would want to be able to keep my rights, whether I had PTSD or not. That doesn't change. That doesn't take away from my rights. So we do see an uptick in this type of problem. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I think, Raquel, is, you're absolutely right. You're 100% spot on. In California, particularly, we have a thing called 5150. And, it's been all over the media before. Singers have written songs about it before. And what it is it's a welfare and institutions code section in California law, section 5150, that basically says in so many words that in so many different aspects that if you're a danger to self or others, and you've been determined as a danger to self or others, law enforcement or doctor or medical professional can commit you for 72 hours, for a 72-hour hold, to evaluate your mental your mental capacity and to see what's going on with you. And if after 72 hours you got, they send you home, they can send you home, or they can keep you under certain circumstances. But regardless of whether they send you home after 72 hours or if they keep you, you now become part of a database of registered people, folks who have been committed for that 72-hour hold, and therefore your firearms rights have been deprived of you for 5 years, for a period of 5 years.
Yeah,
and that's in the California law. But here's where it gets really tricky. The law says that, and it makes way for due process. The law says basically that if you want to, you can petition a judge in the Superior Court for that county to have your firearms rights restored. So I know a number of attorneys who have in the past helped people to have their firearms rights restored. But the caveat to that is that it's extremely rare, because I can't think of a judge today who would willingly restore a person's firearms rights after they've been committed to a 72-hour hold, because they know, that judge knows, that he does not want to be known as the one judge who restored that person's firearms right, and then that person went out and shot up a school, which is probably not really likely to happen, but that's just kind of that's the thing. And it's a constitutional violation, in my opinion, for that judge to think that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So we're making people, we're putting people in really vulnerable positions,
right?
Where they fear that anybody, and it ends up really being anybody, can turn them in for some type of mental instability, and because they happen to be firearm owners, they can make some kind of random decision about your firearms. And oh, by the way, your due process, you could take it up with them later.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for me, because it's confiscate. It's literally violating the law, putting you in an uncomfortable, vulnerable position, and then making you have to go out of your way to prove your innocence. You really are innocent until proven guilty, I think, in America. I think the 1968 Gun Control Act, is specific, and the states are allowed to work under that parameter. But the 1968 Gun Control Act says that somebody has to be determined mentally incompetent, adjudicated by a judge, mentally incompetent, before their Second Amendment rights can be taken away. I think that's fair. I think that's fair, because when a judge adjudicates somebody mentally incompetent, well, that person has had their hearing, that person has defended their rights, that person has had due process. So, that makes sense to me. And then a judge has determined or adjudicated in a ruling that they're mentally unfit. That seems fair. But what's going on in California under that law, and what goes on up in New York under the New York SAFE Act, is that it's up to the healthcare professional. Well, maybe the healthcare professional really doesn't like firearms to begin with. Maybe they have some preconceived notion that firearm owners are what the media depicts us to be. And now we have this game of arbitrarily picking and choosing who can't express their Second Amendment rights. I mean, can you imagine just arbitrarily people stopping you and saying, you know what, I really don't like the way you're talking. Your speech is offensive. I don't like it. Not violent. We're not talking about violent speech, right? I'm talking about protected speech. So they don't like my speech. So could you imagine that they can just randomly go into a police station and be like, yeah, I want to make a complaint because that speech was offensive. We should take away her speech because we think it might cause problems. You know, we don't like it. So let's take away her speech and give it back to me later, maybe, if I decide to fight it in court, with which I have to pay for an attorney to do that.
Right.
Would we do that? Would we honestly ever do that to the First Amendment? Why are we doing it to the Second Amendment? We don't get to choose. We don't get to take away rights from other people. Right. The politicians really have to get this into their minds. They don't get to take away rights from the people. What they can do is, I mean, they can enforce laws. You know, they can have laws enforced, but the way they're putting on the laws under this depiction that the enemy is the NRA and the enemy are gun owners like you and I is absolutely wrong. So it's like fruit of the poisonous tree. It's unfair. It's arbitrary. And that in itself makes it unlawful. You know, like we should just stop doing that. Just stop taking people's guns away. Just stop.
Right. It's not based, you know, it is based on fruits of the poisonous tree. I learned about that in college years ago. But imagine being Sarah Sanders and walking into a restaurant pub in Lexington, Virginia, because you just feel like going to a restaurant, and the manager walks over and says, I don't like the fact that you work for the president, for Donald Trump. Therefore, I'm going to kick you out of this restaurant. And that exact thing happened last night. Guess what, Raquel? Guess what, everybody? That is suppression of the press clause of the United States Constitution. We have a First Amendment. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or of the press. And there's a press clause in there. And Sarah Sanders walks into a restaurant, I believe it was yesterday, in Lexington, Virginia, and she was kicked out by the manager because she works for the president of the United States of America. And that right there is suppression of our First Amendment right. And they're doing the same exact thing. Discrimination. Yeah, they were discriminating. And you know, at the end of the day, and I hate to say this, Raquel, but the restaurant has every right to refuse service to any patron for any reason whatsoever, unless if she were black, if she were an African American, and if she were black, and she walked into that restaurant and said, "I can't serve you because you're black." Well, now that restaurant's in trouble. But because Sarah Sanders works for the president, directly for the president of the United States, and is the press secretary, and you know, politely tells other reporters in the press room like it is, she got kicked out. She had to suffer consequences because of her political beliefs and because of who she works for. And I liken it to you walk into a restaurant, a regular chain restaurant that might be owned by a franchisee, and the franchisee decided, I'm going to paste a notice on the door, and it's going to be compliant with the state statute that says that no gun signs have the force of law. And it's going to say no guns allowed. It's going to say bad gun, no gun for you. Or if you're carrying a firearm, please do not enter this establishment. And on a number of occasions, I've walked in and then I've looked, and the waitress would walk up to me. Look, I'm guilty of this. And then the waitress would say, "Hi, can I seat you?" And I would walk over, and then I would stop, and I'd do a double take, a purposeful double take, turn around, see the no gun sign again, and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm being turned away," and just walk out. And the waitress, and in this case, the last time I did that, the waitress,
patronize those places.
The waitress was shocked. She was in shock, and she almost teared up And she said, "Why are you leaving? What's the matter? What, you haven't been? I haven't turned you away." And I'd point to the sign and I'd say, "I can't come in here because of it." And she actually tried to grab me by the arm and pull me, and I said, "I can't come in because of the sign. I have to follow policy. It's incumbent upon us to follow policy." I said, and I told her, I said, if you don't like that policy, tell your manager. But if you can tell your manager that I have to leave, that I'm being turned away by this policy here. And it's not about the waitress. I felt terrible for the waitress. I wanted to give her a hug, but at the end of the day, and again, I'm no legal expert. I'm not a lawyer. If you need a lawyer, if anybody needs a lawyer, you know what to do. But if you walk into one of those establishments and then something terrible happens, and you have to use your firearm for any particular reason in that establishment where firearms were not allowed, the prosecutor is going to have fun with that one. He's going to love that one, right. Because he's going to think he has an easy case. And the question is going to be, well, if you walked in, if you're intelligent enough to carry a firearm outside the home, then you're intelligent enough to read the English language, and you should have known that firearms weren't allowed. So, and that person would still be alive today if you had complied with that restaurant policy. And that's the answer that you're going to have to tell the court if something terrible happens, which is why it's incumbent upon persons.
These laws, as I was saying earlier, I mean, the gun control laws, they put us in very vulnerable positions. Mm-hmm. So, we don't want to be criminals, right? So we're law-abiding citizens. Right. We want to follow the law. We'll follow the procedure. But when we keep getting onslaughted with the procedure, mm-hmm. It's almost like, and there's so much of it, so you sort of lose track. Did I sneeze today? Did I commit a felony? Did I do something wrong? It just becomes unstoppable. I had Anthony Calandro on a few weeks ago. He is the founder of Gun for Hire, which is the biggest gun range in the state of New Jersey. But he was saying that, well, he said a lot of different things. I totally lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
He says a million things. But getting on the gun-free zones that don't really help anybody, right?
Right. So gun-free zones are killing zones.
Talking about training, and that people who take training, they take it very seriously because we're dealing with a firearm, which has the potential of really harming somebody. So it's almost similar, like if you're going to learn how to drive an 18 tire inch truck, you're going to want to really learn how to do it because it's just beneficial for yourself, right?
You can't just get in a big truck
if you don't know how to drive and you haven't gotten any training in it, because it could potentially be dangerous to yourself or somebody else. Mm-hmm. And that's just responsible adulthood. So what he said, he comes across the people that he trains is that they're responsible adults. But the laws, they are penalizing us. The laws are penalizing us, and we're left like we don't know how we're supposed to react because we're just trying to defend ourselves. I mean, there's plenty of reasons why the Second Amendment, is so important. It's a civil right. That's what Anthony Calandro said. He was going to come to me because he explained it, and I agree with him. I'm sure you do too. The Second Amendment is actually a civil right. Mm-hmm. Because it is at the core of our institution, of our Constitution. It's because it's the idea that it's something God-given. It's something that we have already. We didn't really have to put that on a piece of paper. That to be free, we ought to have the freedom to protect ourselves by any means, really. And that's already sort of, it's already ingrained in us. It's our civil right to do that beyond even the Constitution. So why are all these people beating us up over it? I want to tell them to back off. Just back off. If you don't want to buy a firearm, don't. But don't penalize me when I didn't do anything wrong. That's the part I want to get across to the public. You can have your opinion, and that's fine and dandy. But when your opinion is invading into my freedom, that's when I have to say, you have to stop it.
Right. It seems to me like those people who are opposed to the right to keep and bear arms, to the private ownership of guns, it's more politically convenient for them. It's a political convenience tool for them to oppose our rights and to try and deprive us of our right to keep and bear arms. And again, this goes back to voting, people voting. One of the things that's really bothering me at this point now is I just moved to Arizona. That's not what bothers me, but what bothers me about my move to Arizona is that a lot of people are coming from from California to states like Arizona, Texas, Nevada, I think North Carolina, a few other states, maybe even Florida. And they're saying, well, you might ask them, well, why did you leave California? And they might say, well, the reason I left California is because of the high taxes, the endless regulation, it's anti-business, you can't own a business. And I say, okay, well, who are you going to vote for this election? And they're going to say every single Democrat down the line. And those Democrats are going to be the guys who are going to vote in measures that deprive you of your right to own a business, or to make it more difficult for you to own a business and to run a business, to manage. And they're going to make it as impossible as they could for you to own a firearm if you could. They're going to do everything they can to jack up your property taxes, to jack up sales taxes and income taxes, and everything that's contrary to why those people left California in the first place. And this is why I tell people, this is why I'm going back and stuck. I seem to be stuck on, for those of you out there and for those who run across the type of person who is concerned about that sort of thing, they've got to vote for the guy who can best address their right to keep and bear arms. They have to vote for the guy who can best address their right to be able to run a business if they want to be able to run a business, to start a business, to start a nonprofit. You remember back when the IRS scandal, where they were targeting conservative organizations during the elections. I forget that woman's name. And there were people who wanted to see her in an orange jumpsuit because of what she was doing. She was running the IRS. She was running that department at the time for purposes of giving nonprofit status to conservative organizations. And she was targeting them because they were conservative organizations. If I had made the attempt to nonprofit my organization at the time, any of my organizations at the time, she would have targeted me because it's a pro-gun, pro-conservative organization. So I held off at the time. I waited until that whole scandal was over. But there were other organizations that really suffered because of her.
Right. I remember that was under Obama.
Yeah, that was under Obama and Lois Lerner, you know, and she's still walking the streets today. And a lot of people have a problem with that. She's still walking the streets just like Hillary Clinton. So,
well, I think we could definitely conclude that there is a terrible double standard out there in news, in the mainstream, the media. That double standard comes through even on television shows. It comes through in your daily newspapers, and the double standard is that you know, that seemingly everyone's like is controlled by the progressive liberals, but the progressive liberals they're all the way on the left. You know, this is a political philosophy that's all the way on the left. And they're very small in percentage when you think about the population as a whole. Most people, like Bill O'Reilly used to say, most Americans are center right. The numbers say that. Most people are on philosophy are center right. So we have this very, very loud left wing agenda, in my opinion, left wing. And unfortunately, they're not producing those Democrats, those blue dog Democrats, they call them fiscal conservatives, that are running away from that agenda and moving towards where the population is. No, they're kind of keeping in the left. They're really loud. They control the media. They control Hollywood.
They're still whacked out.
And what has happened is really double standard. And I think if the public, it doesn't take you and me to talk about it, for the public to really look at it. Just really look at it. Look at the double standard when it comes to a Republican politician or a Democrat politician, no matter what they've done. Okay? There's always going to be the attack dog media on the conservative Republican, and then the liberal Democrat kind of gets a pass. It's almost the same way it was during the Obama presidency. So we had a lot of outlets, probably independent outlets more, making certain complaints about Obama. Was he born in America? Where's his college record? There were all kinds of questions. There were all kinds of inquiries into who is Obama, where did he come from, who supported him, who paid for his college, lots of inquiries, but the media didn't want to answer them, not in the public.
Right.
So the independent news, and I think that because of that, the independent news really blew up, and it really is a good thing. So I just want to add to what you're saying. Not only do we want to take a look at who's running for office, it's a very important election, which is electing congressional reps, as well as on the federal level, as well as in the Senate. So we want to pay some attention. We also have governor's races going on. So we want to pay attention to who they are, and most of the time the GOP are putting forth the candidates that are more pro 2A, that is for sure. And the second thing is to that when you are seeing these media reports, even right down to your local media or your local newspapers, just take it with a grain of salt. See if you can identify that double standard. Let's put the players aside for a second. You may not like the players on either side, either way. Put them aside for a second. Try to recognize that there is a double standard that is unfair. If we're going to call somebody out on it, let's call everybody out on it. If we're going to
call everybody out,
protect somebody, I don't think we should be protecting anybody. I think that's the whole reason for the media, and it really is to be a watchdog for the politicians, for the government. So when they're doing something wrong and sneaky and not telling the public, well, the media is supposed to be right there on the front lines on both sides. So it's whether it's a Republican, a Democrat, Libertarian, it doesn't matter who's in all, it doesn't matter which political party. What matters is that there's never a problem with inquiries. If you want to ask questions, I don't think, if someone wants to be president, okay, well then the president is going to have to answer those questions. If you have the inquiries, I think if you want to get elected, you're going to have to answer those questions. And the media is simply covering it up and covering Obama up, I don't think it really did justice for him. Because maybe there's some truth in there. Maybe he has something to say. But they just cover it up as if the inquiries never happened.
They just cover it up, yeah.
Inquiries were ludicrous. When you and I both know that inquiries are very, very rarely ludicrous. It's really, you have to hold people accountable. And if you're a voter, and you're an American citizen and a concerned citizen, and you want to participate in the electoral process, you want to know what these candidates have to say. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. And the media and journalism, really investigative journalism, is a search for the truth. It really is about asking questions, regardless of who the players are. And that's not happening.
Yeah, it's not happening. The thing about that.
A recording, a broken record sometimes. I say it a lot on the radio. It's almost like, I think sometimes people just have to hear it.
Yeah. The thing the one thing that you touched on is holding people accountable, no matter what their political opinion is, no matter what side they stand on. If you're going to hold one side accountable for something and severely punish them for something that they did, you got to also severely punish the others. And when you have Roseanne Barr, who made a comment about Valerie Jarrett last month or a month and a half ago or so. And she immediately gets fired. Her Twitter, I don't know whether Twitter got shut down or not, but she deletes the tweet. She apologizes profusely, almost in tears, but the network still fires her. And then you have this Peter Fonda who says something so incredibly vile and horrific, absolutely horrific against a child. And if I were Barron Trump right now, if I were Donald Trump's son, and I saw that, it would scare the hell out of me. I would be traumatized. I would imagine when I saw that tweet, I thought the first person I thought of was Barron and Melania. And I thought, Barron, I hope you do not see that tweet. And I hope that you're not watching the news, because when he was watching the news, when Kathy Griffin was holding up the severed head of Donald Trump, he really thought that it was Donald Trump's severed head. And he was traumatized. Yeah, and he ran to his mom, and I mean, he was traumatized. And I felt so bad, Raquel, for him, because when they say those things, when they say terrible things about the First Lady, when they say terrible things about Ivanka Trump, this is the reason why we tell media, we tell people, hands off the president's family. The president is fair game. Okay, that's fine. But hands off mom, hands off Aunt Ivanka, hands off, Uncle Erik and Uncle Don, hands off those guys, and hands off the children and the grandchildren. And there are Hollywood idiots today who have actually gone after the infant grandchildren of the president. There are actually tweets out there that actually go after, that say vile things about the infant grandchildren. And then there's people on the left who say, well, it's okay because
we can't buy it. We can't. We have to just avoid that media, because it really is vile, and it makes me uncomfortable. I don't follow it. I don't look at it. I don't read it. I kind of like.
Yeah,
it's so vile.
You can't follow it. I don't want to click on it. I don't want to click on the site. Yeah. But the other thing is that the other thing that really bothers me about that is that there's media pundits right there on Fox News that will say, well, it's okay because conservatives were going after Chelsea Clinton back in the day. They weren't as vile. I do admit I did, and I will give you, and I'll say it all day, that there were people who actually went out and said, terrible things about Chelsea Clinton. To give you an example, there were people who said she was ugly. And I said, what planet were you born on? I think she's pretty good looking. Okay. That was my opinion. I thought, you can look at Chelsea Clinton. I think she's pretty good looking, but there were people who were actually saying that. And
I think the difference is, Erik, that you didn't have the popular people with big voices, like Peter Fonda, right? I mean, he's in Hollywood. He's like a top guy.
He's using Hollywood as a platform.
He comes out. He says whatever he wants. He's not held accountable for the cruelty of it. But we can do.
This movie is still going on.
Backlash, but we are coming down to the end, Erik. I do appreciate your time and stuff. It's been a great show. I think a lot of it.
Pleasure.
I want to let the viewers know that I really would appreciate your comment, or even if it's criticism, what you would like to see on my program, do something different, anything at all. Feel free to go to my Facebook page and send me a message there, Raquel Okyay on Facebook. And if you're not on Facebook and you want to send me an email, you can do that too. And that's my full name @gmail.com. So that's Raquel Okyay @gmail.com. Erik, please have the last word real quick and tell the viewers where they can find you.
Well, you can find me on Facebook, of course. Facebook, Erik Royce. There's several Erik Royces out there, but my name, my Facebook name is Facebook/Erik Royce. And you could also look up Trucker Guns. Trucker Guns is on Facebook. And, you know, one of the things that I just want to touch on in closing is that if any of you folks watching are concerned about your right to keep and bear arms, your right to be able to run a business, your right to be able to stay in your home without being taxed out of your home because of property taxes, you want to be able to go out and buy that car that you've been dreaming about, then you've got to vote for the guy who can best address your right to keep and bear arms, whoever it might be. You know, I'm not telling you what party you should vote for, but I think that most of us who are smart and who have been paying attention to politics for a long time know, as a rule of thumb, who supports our right to keep and bear arms. And one of the things that I will say in closing is that the government does not grant you the right to keep and bear arms. It's God. It's your God-given right to keep and bear arms. It's in the Constitution, and it's a pre-existing right. And the framers decided that it was a pre-existing right. And the Supreme Court in 2010 and 2008 decided that the right to keep and bear arms is implicit in the concept of ordered liberty and deeply rooted in the history and traditions of our nation. And therefore, you cannot be deprived of your right to keep and bear arms without having your due process rights violated. And so we still have politicians today, particularly in California and in the Democratic Party, who are doing everything they could in their power to try and deprive you of your right to keep and bear arms. And contrary to what they say, that, well, we respect the Second Amendment, but it's a right to duck hunting. You know, and by the way, the Second Amendment wasn't about duck hunting. It was actually about keeping those government thugs in check. And that's all I have to say. That's what I have.
Excellent. Amen.
Amen.
God-given right. Second Amendment.
Gun rights.
Second Amendment.
Gun rights policy conference.
Support the Second Amendment.
Yeah, support the Second Amendment. Attend the Gun Rights Policy Conference in September. It's in Chicago this coming September. The end of September. Go to Second Amendment Foundation, SAF.org, and look up Gun Rights Policy Conference. It's in September. Hotel spaces are limited. Get your flight out there, get your hotel reservations. I have my hotel reservation.
I know, you think so far ahead. I totally want to go this year so badly because it's so much fun. And and you know, you get to hear a bunch of great speakers speak. Okyay, they give out a lot of material.
There you go.
I'll give a plug for Alan Gottlieb, Gun Rights. Fact book, which I got marked up and stuff, and I just refer to it sometime because he's got a great table of contents here. It's like, what topic do I want to brush up on?
Yeah.
And I just take Alan Gottlieb's book called Gun Rights Fact Book. I got it for free at the Gun Rights Policy Conference. That's how great.
I have one of those too, but I'm a Second Amendment Foundation life member.
Oh, nice.
I'm also a life member of the NRA. I'm a life patron member of the NRA. Cool. And I'm a member of several other really good gun rights organizations, including the California Rifle and Pistol Association. And I would say
of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. Got to give them a plug. And Florida Carry. Great group. Yeah.
Florida Carry is good.
And I'm on the NRA too.
Yeah, NRA. And you've got to be a member of the NRA. Got to be a member of the NRA. I tell people, if not for the NRA, Hurricane Katrina confiscation would not have happened because guns would have been confiscated long before Hurricane Katrina. And because of the NRA, a lot of people are able to practice their right to keep and bear arms because the government is less inclined. yes, there is confiscation going on today, especially in California, with regard to
And New
the
York, and New
and
Jersey.
New York and New Jersey with regard to the mental health issue that's going on, and these gun violence restraining orders that are being carried out in California. My sister, I have a couple of sisters who tried to sick the gun violence restraining order on me before it even took effect, and that's a whole nother issue.
We got to get going now. We're definitely down to the end, Erik. I appreciate it so much again for calling in. You're BFF, you're BFF. Forever, friends forever. I'm older.
Yeah.
Remember.
Yeah. My sister from another mister.
That's right. My brother from another mother.
All right. See you next time. Come out here to Arizona sometime.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Bye, Erik.
All right. Bye-bye.